Micantlaca Women, Resistance since 1492. Presentation by Citlali Citlalmina Anahuac, member of the Mexica movement. This presentation was put together for the Mexica New Year of 2013. What does white supremacy make us think of ourselves? Overly sexualized, dumb, dirty, self-hating. These images we are familiar with. We are familiar with Pocahontas. We are familiar with Shell from Roto Dorado. We watch novelas on evenings with our parents, characters that we make fun of, dark-skinned characters that we mock. We look at beauty standards in novelas. The only way a woman would be beautiful is if she somehow makes herself look whiter. And in the middle, we have this outright racist character from the comedy show of La Escuelita. This woman is wearing a huipil, the beautiful traditional huipil, and she has a bone in her head. Who were we before 1492? And why do we feel ashamed of being a Micantlaca woman? Before the shaming, before the genocide, before the invasion of our continent, we have been participating in the civilizations of our people. Since the beginning of the creation of civilizations, we have here a chronological example. Women in Caral, 5500 BCE, Olmec women, 2500 BCE, Mayan women depicted again and again in the murals, Mixtec women depicted in the codices. These examples show us that we played vital roles in the creation and maintenance of our cities. More contemporary examples and views of Micantlaca women, we have the Hopi, the Navajo, the Tangba. In particular, we will emphasize on the Mexica society. Not because it is better than any other culture, not because it is superior than any other culture, it's because that's the most information that we have. The most sources, the most artifacts, the most archaeological information, the first person accounts. And again, we always have to challenge and be critical of these interpretations of our culture, because obviously they were being documented by Europeans themselves, who already came with a set of ideas that degraded us, seen us as subhuman, had no respect for our culture. But the challenge is that we have to decipher, we have to decolonize, we have to filter as much as we can all of that Eurocentricity in our study. At least at this point, we can draw certain conclusions of our civilizations, especially in the Mexica city. We have examples of women being scribes, doctors, priestess, composers of songs and poetry, and teachers. In this example, this is taken from Codex Boturini. This is an example of the migration that the Mexica took when entering the Valley of Mexico. We have here a woman priestess as part of the collective leadership that went into the Valley of Mexico. This is important for us. It's important to note that women participated in theological meetings and theological moments of the history of the Mexica. Resistance. After the Spaniards and Europeans invaded our lands, we don't know of the warrior women who gave their lives for our people. As I will talk later, we seem to only be bombarded constantly by one woman, Malinche. Why don't we know of women who gave their lives, who picked up the weapons from the hands of our warriors as they were laying dying on the floors of Tenochtitlan? I will quote from the book Relación Breve de la Conquista de la Nueva España, written by Francisco de Aguilar. Quote, "The Mexicans almost vanquished. A great number of women were left among them. They armed them all and stationed them on the rooftops. The Spaniards were alarmed at seeing so many of them enemy again, whooping and shouting at them, and when they began killing them, they saw they were women. There was dismay on both sides." So what we have here are women participating in the defense of Mexico Tenochtitlan. Seeing that the men had already been killed, they were being wiped out by the Spaniards, they had a choice to make, and they made the choice to also give their lives for the defense of their people. On another account, we have what is called La Noche Triste. And according to the accounts, the Spaniards were trying to escape the city through the canal, and they were doing so quietly as to not be caught by the Mexica. But a woman who was nearby seen them fleeing, and what she did was sound the alarm. She sounded the alarm, which alerted our warriors, and they were able to catch up to them and battle them and defeat them. That battle, although it was one night, will be in the history of our people of a night of resistance. To the Spaniards, obviously, it was La Noche Triste, the sad night. But to our ancestors, it was the happy night, the victorious night. But of course, how can we know of these women, of these heroes of ours, if we're constantly bombarded with myths that all women wanted to do was just leave with the white man, give up their culture and join the white man, as we see this again and again in cartoons and movies and films and books. We very well know the story of Pocahontas. We very well think and assume that it was all just a lovely love story, but it was not. It was rape. It was terrorism. And women also fought alongside of our male warriors, because when it came down to it, all of us became warriors to defend our people. Here we have an example taken by Indian women of early Mexico. And it's a great quote because it shows how women were leaders in the uprisings against the Spaniards and Europeans. The quote says, "Women were frequent participants in and even on occasion leader of colonial rebellions. Militiamen called in by the Spanish authorities were likely to encounter nasty mobs of hundreds of women brandishing spears and kitchen knives or cradling rocks in their skirts, and young children and old people carrying or throwing whatever they could manage, as well as better armed groups of adult men. In at least 1/4 of the cases, women led the attacks and were visibly aggressive, insulting, and rebellious in their behavior towards outside authorities." This is a great example of how not all women in our civilization, in our cities, were like Malinche. They were warriors, and they participated again and again in the defense and in the attack of the Spaniards. Who are some of these warriors, you may wonder? Let me introduce you to the brave, the courageous, our hero, Micaela Bastidas. She was born in Tamburco, 1745, and she died in Cusco, May 18, 1781. She was a principal advisor to and driving force behind her husband. She was part of the famous Council of Five. She helped her husband organize rebellions and pushed him. Obviously, organizing rebellions at this time was dangerous, and it meant that you sacrificed your life. And indeed, she did sacrifice her life, as well as Tupac Amaru II. To show the courage and to show what she was up against, I will read this quote that describes the execution of Micaela Bastidas. "For their actions, Bastidas, her husband, and their associates were executed by the Spanish colonial administration in Cusco on May 18, 1781. Bastidas went to the scaffold where before her husband's eyes her tongue was cut out and she was garroted. Her agony was prolonged because her neck was too slender for the screw to strangle her. The executioners finally succeeded by tying ropes around her neck and each pulling in a different direction. Her body and that of her husband were later carried to Bichu, where they were burned. Their ashes were thrown into a nearby river." Why don't we know of Micaela Bastidas? Why don't we know of an indigenous woman, a Nicantlaca woman who gave her life for her people? What is behind the agenda of the constant promotion of Malinche, who willingly went with the Spaniards? Are they trying to tell us something? Are they trying to make us today go along with the Europeans? Go on their side? Walk over to the white supremacist side? I think so. Let me introduce you to another of our heroes. She goes by the name and was known as Toipurina. She was a Tangva Nicantlaka woman from 1760 to 1799. On October 25th, 1785, she helped lead a revolt. And I will quote, just so you can get an idea, a little bit more of her experiences. Quote, in 1771, Toipurina was a 10-year-old girl in the nearby village of Jashevit, but her life drastically changed after the Spanish missionaries and soldiers arrived that year and claimed the land of what would become the San Gabriel mission. After a soldier raped the wife of an Indian chief, the chief protested. He was killed, and his head displayed on the pole as an example to others. Growing up outside the mission walls, Toipurina watched nearly 1,000 of her neighbors lured into captive Christianity by the clothes, foods, blankets the padres offered to converts. She grew indignant as she saw them gradually confined to the mission and forced them into farm work. She witnessed the population of neophytes, as the Indian converts were called, dying from syphilis and other diseases, and being chained and beaten when they tried to escape. There are many accounts that describe what happened once Toipurina was taken into custody and caught for planning the rebellion on October 25th, 1785. But this is the one that was most common in the research that I did on Toipurina. And according to these accounts, this is what she said in court. I hate the padres and all of you for living here on my native soil, for trespassing upon the land of my forefathers and despoiling our tribal domains. Why don't we know of Toipurina? Why don't we know of Micaela Bastidas? Why don't we know of women who gave their lives instead of submitting into Europeans and the Spaniards? Why don't we know of these heroes of ours? Why do we know of Malinche? Why do we know of Malinche? Why are we forced to study her? Why are we forced to read poems dedicated to her? Why do we know of a woman who willingly joined the Spaniards? Why do we only know of Malinche and not the women warriors who fought the Europeans? The promotion of Malinche reinforces the idea of submission and acceptance of the genocide of our people. We as Nicantlaka women are given Malinche as an example. We are supposed to relate to her. We are supposed to see her as a victim. We are supposed to identify with her. Why are we not told about the women warriors? Because we're not supposed to be warriors. We're not supposed to go against white supremacy. We are supposed to just bow down to it, marry it, have kids, and forget about our own people. The promotion of Malinche serves two major focuses. That Nicantlaka women willingly accepted the Europeans. That Nicantlaka women had no interest in defending our people as a whole. Now, in being critical about Malinche, and for the claims that it's sexist how she is treated, we do agree in the Mexica movement that there is a form of sexism here. But the form of sexism that exists in the whole argument of Malinche comes in the emphasis of a woman traitor. The woman traitor is being taken to the pedestal of treason. Why don't we hold our male traitors accountable? Why don't we bash Motecuzoma, who was in charge of the warriors at Tenochtitlan, who would send daily spies to check on how the Spaniards were killing our people without any shame? Why don't we hold him accountable as a traitor? Why do we only emphasize on the woman trader? That is sexism. We should trade, we should bring out, we should expose and call out treason, regardless of gender. And Moctezuma had more power and influence and had the actual military of Mexico Tenochtitlan to completely wipe out the Spaniards, and he refused. That is treason, and that should also be held accountable as treason. Now, we have to understand that when the Spaniards invaded us, they came with a set of ideologies, of concepts, of perceptions. They viewed women as inferiors. They didn't care for their own women in Spain and in Europe. How would they care about our own women here in Semanahuac? Lack of women names in documenting our history. The Western world has specifically sought to seek out the males in history, giving very little importance to women. Add the colonial factor to it, and it worsens our possibility of having clear grasp on the lives of women after 1492. Now, there are a lot of so-called Chicana feminists who criticize our view of the Mexica. And, for example, the author Ana Castillo states in her book Massacre of the Dreamers something to the effect that Mexica women were just as oppressed as Spanish women, and that they had no position in society in Mexico Tenochtitlan. Well, actually, doing real research on Mexica civilization, we find out that our roles in that civilization actually diminished with colonialism. To expand on that, I will share with you this quote. This quote is also from Indian Women of Early Mexico, a great book that I would recommend for anyone who's studying or interested in understanding Nicantlaca women's history. Quote, "The imposition of colonial rule had a powerful influence on women's experiences and gender as an organizing principle among the Mexica. Many of the complex Mexica concepts of gender did not survive this transition, and women's activities and lives became more circumscribed and controlled. Yet they still held enough power and authority to play significant roles in Indian protests and uprisings against colonial rule throughout Central Mexico." Another quote, "Moreover, from this time forward, the well-defined and often quite complementary gender roles as they were known for the pre-Hispanic era changed, and Native women in general experienced a diminishing presence in traditional social spheres." Feminism, sexism, and liberation. How does this fit in our struggle for liberation, in our struggle for total decolonization? Whether it be white feminists or Chicana, quote unquote, and we say that because almost 99% of these ex-Chicana feminists are now Latina, self-identified feminists. Both groups ask us to look away from our heritage because it was so patriarchal, and instead embrace no country and have allegiance to no future. We as Nicantlaca women have to cleanse the eyes of feminists and show that we will participate in the liberation of our people to the fullest capacity and create our space as women once again. We have to remember that we are reconstructing ourselves, and in the reconstructing of our nation, we are cleansing away from these European ideologies of equality and justice within their historical experiences and issues and conflict. We cannot come up with European solutions because we haven't had that European experience, because we are not Europeans. We have experienced genocide, rape, and terrorism with Europeans. That is our relationship. They have killed us for the last 5 centuries. They have raped us for the last 5 centuries. They have occupied us for the last 5 centuries. So We cannot use what they have come up with as solutions to their problems because they do not address the fact that they have been killing us for 5 centuries, have been raping us for 5 centuries, and have been occupying us for 5 centuries. A great quote that completely embraces and confirms this conclusion comes from Pam Colorado, an Oneida scholar that is quoted in the book The State of Native America. And I quote, "It seems to me the feminist agenda is basically one of rearranging social relations within the society which is occupying our land and utilizing our resources for its own benefit. Nothing I've encountered in feminist theory addresses the fact of our colonization or the wrongness of white women's stake in it. I can only conclude that like Marxism, which arrives at the same outcome through class rather than gender theory, feminism is essentially a Euro supremacist ideology and is therefore quite imperialist in its implications." End quote. This is a great example, a great conclusion to make. Pretty much what feminism was, it was the white woman asking for equality to the white man. They were shocked, they were disgusted that they were being treated similar to how Nicantlaka women and black women and non-white women of the world were being treated. They were appalled. How is it that they, as white women, were not getting the same power and the same resources and the same stolen land and stolen resources that the men were? The creation of race, the creation of whiteness became a unifying force for them. So for them, being feminist, it was to be equal. And we're not talking about gender equality. We're talking about power, being equal with men who were raping, who were killing, who were occupying. When you want to be equal to that type of man, you also want to be able to have the right to continue occupying and stealing and raping a people. So that's what feminism was. It was an equalizer for white men and white women. That's what it was. We as Nicantlaka women, we cannot use feminism because that's not the relationship that we have had with our men. We have to understand our history and look at our ideologies and our concepts to be able to come with a solution that's going to emphasize and that's going to respect and that's going to prioritize who we are as a people. Feminism does not offer us that. It offers us the white woman's reaction to the takeover of the world, and they did not want to be left behind. What are we doing now? Nicantlaka women today, we are in the Mexica movement. We are studying our history. We are not going to stand to machismo. We are not going to stand for feminism. We are not going to stand for white supremacy. We confront them. And as part of our organization, we do not allow machismo. We do not allow feminism. We are creating a whole new concept of liberation in which we do not have to worry about feminism and machismo because we are making damn sure that we do not have those attitudes within our organizing strategies, within the planning of our nation. There will be no place for such concepts and such degrading attitudes in the liberation struggle. Join us, resisting, educating, liberating, being active in our community. We invite everyone to participate in our struggle towards liberation, women and men, just like we've been fighting since 1492, the terrorism. We must continue together. Sisters, our brothers are not our enemies. We've been taught and socialized and indoctrinated by this white feminist jargon that they are our enemies. That's who we have to fight. But no, we have to unite among ourselves, women and men of this Nicantlaka nation. We are not each other's enemies. That's what they want us to believe. They want us to be at each other's throat. So that way they keep distracting us from the real enemy of occupation for the last 5 centuries and white supremacy. Until we cleanse ourselves from these ideologies that keep us divided and fighting each other, we are never going to get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem of our conditions to this day is called occupation by Europeans and their systematic genocidal institutions and policies that they have been activating in all governments of this stolen continent since 1492. We need to tear away at this matrix of white supremacy, and we need to continue to study our history and our true identity and actively defending, educating our people. 5 centuries of genocide and terrorism are not going to be undone by 1 year of study, by 2 years of study and activism. This is a lifetime that we're talking about. We must fight for our people's liberation every day until the end of our days.